All right. Oh, Michael Pecker's already here. Ave Imperator. Ave Michael. So I wanted to, well, actually do a little reading from this brilliant little book, which my most loyal henchman, oh, where is it? There. My most loyal henchman gave me this as a little gift. Now, originally, before I started reading it, I thought it was just, direct quotes from Chesterton, and of course, it has quite a lot of those. But it's an even more interesting book than that because it gives you sort of context for his writings. And a very good point in the introduction that it makes is that Chesterton was completely uninterested in personal opinions and was motivated by a very driven logic, objectivity, which I think, let me just see if I can read a piece on that. Yeah, so it's halfway through this introduction. It says, as children of our anti-dogmatic and blindly sentimental age, we're not used to listening to someone so concerned with the veracity or falsehood of ideas and principles, or with common sense and logic. So this is the guy writing the introduction describing what it's like to, deal with reading Chesterton. Hello, Dan. Oh, thank you for that. Hello, Woolly Ram. Actually, Woolly, at one point we need to do another stream. In any case, our age is even less familiar with truth than that of a certain Augustinian monk, Martin Luther, who would spend his entire life discussing ideas in his own unique way, sometimes both violent and coarse with his adversaries, beginning with the day he faced his first contradictors, John Eck and Sylvester Pierres. Let me just see if it's worth reading this. Anyway, and he continues saying, nonetheless, the unsettling genius of Chesterton need no lawyer's defense. He defended better in his own rather amusing way, thundering a sharp wake-up call to our intellectual lethargy. And I wanted to read two pages? Yeah, it's about 2 pages. It's a very, very interesting book. Oh, you're welcome, Dan, and thanks for I think it was you that reminded me to give the heads up on Telegram because I'm half shadow banned on YouTube or whatever. No, pardon me, that went down the wrong way. So this is it's chapter 3, and I'm just going to read 2 pages from it. It starts out with a quote by Hilaire Belloc in Richelieu that says, when Europe was united before the catastrophe of the 16th century, before the shipwreck of Christendom, one religion inspired the soul of the West. That is exactly true. There was one religion before, Catholicism. Of course, there were the backstabbing Orthodox in the East, but, by and large, they weren't that far apart. Now, this bit of writing is the guy who is there's Wojciech Golonka who's talking about Chesterton, but it's an interesting couple of paragraphs. Scholars may, and often do, find Chesterton's historical shortcuts annoying. Worse, he had a visceral aversion for academic canons and detested worrying about precise dates or exact quotes. However, beyond any detail he may have misplaced, his understanding of historical phenomena is amazing, even for scholars studying his work. Therefore, instead of searching his writings for the story of the Reformation, let's simply use them to help us understand the true nature of the facts and the men involved. 1. Historical warning. Protestantism is often portrayed as a breakdown of medieval obscurantism, and to justify the Reformation with all its brutality, the Catholic abuses are enumerated. For Chesterton, it was almost the exact opposite. Yet, without jumping ahead, here is a warning he gives in Orthodoxy regarding possible caricatures of Middle Ages and of Catholicism. Now, this is Chesterton. The ordinary agnostic has got his facts all wrong. He is a non-believer for a multitude of reasons, but they are untrue reasons. He doubts because the Middle Ages were barbaric, but they weren't. Because Darwinism is demonstrated, but it isn't. Because miracles do not happen, but they do. Because monks were lazy, but they were very industrious. Because nuns are unhappy, but they're particularly cheerful. Because Christian art was sad and pale, but it was picked out in peculiarly bright colors and gay with gold. It's such an accurate description, isn't it? And I mean, I find myself in this agnostic who didn't believe because, well, the Middle Ages were barbaric, except they weren't. That was the height of, I would say, craftsmanship. That's why it's called the Renaissance, the rebirthing, because it was so rich with beauty, power, order. But here's the interesting thing. These words that Chesterton had written, these lines, penned almost 15 years before he became a Catholic, show Chesterton's methodological seriousness that is impermeable to emotions or the catchwords of propaganda. Indeed, one must realize the extent of the historical disinformation that took place and of which even those who live in the present era are perhaps the unconscious victims. Not perhaps, without a doubt. And in fact, I would say that in the present era, they're far more unconsciously victim of propaganda than they were in Chesterton's era. It may be helpful to keep in mind this relevant comment from a learned French scholar, Etienne Gilson. This is now quoting Etienne Gilson. No one has pointed out better than Chesterton, and in a form easy to understand, to what extent we were led to take for Catholicism what was actually its worst enemy, Lutheranism, or its disguised form, Jansenism, which I thought is, this is from Dixit, Etienne Gilson. With that thought, it is now time for information on the Reformation itself. Well, if you want me to carry on reading, I will. These are pages I have not read yet. But it's a good little book, it really is. And which brings me to the title of today's stream and the little placeholder image that I had for it. I was trying to think, how do you get across the point that Protestantism is complete nonsense in a quick, short way? And I remember Vox telling a story about how, I think he was talking to his wife, and she said something like, oh, she was cutting the crust out. And he said something like, why are you cutting the crust out? The crust's the best part. And he said that just because he'd been told that as a kid. And of course, Space Bunny has done some, I can't remember now what, I think she's a qualified biologist of some sort, or neurobiologist, I can't remember. Anyway, she knows quite a lot about biology anyway. And she goes she looks at him and goes, what are you talking about? What are you talking about? It's the best part. First of all, the dough is made out all of the same stuff, and the crust is the part that gets a little bit burnt. So if anything, it's carcinogenic. To which Vox was like, oh yeah, I never thought about it. And I've told a similar story of my own, and now that I'm back in Italy, I'm reminded of it because you get these like hairy caterpillars in Italy. There's like some really fuzzy caterpillars. And as a kid, when I grew up with my grandmothers in the countryside, and we saw one of these things, she was like, "Don't touch it. If you touch it, it'll sting you. It'll like give you like hives and stuff." And I wasn't really sure about it, but then one day, like with my dad, he also told me, don't touch that, that'll like burn your skin and stuff. And so I never did. Then like 20 something years later, I was in my 30s and I was at my dad's house in Africa. And I saw one of these same sort of hairy caterpillar. And I thought, you know what? I just want to find out how bad this burn is. So I let this thing crawl onto my hand and like crawled all up my arm. And I waited and nothing happened. And after a while I realized, hey, this little caterpillar doesn't harm me at all. So I went to my dad with it in my hand. I said, Dad, why the fuck did you lie to me? This thing doesn't sting you at all. And he looked at me and he goes, oh, well, I didn't know. I didn't know I lied to you. They lied to me too. They told me it stings you if you touch it. I never touched it. And it's such a clear passage of old lies just being sent down the river. And that's what Protestantism is. I mean, you cannot logically consider Protestantism as being valid. It's just, it's obnoxious to even think so. You've got one church that started from the time of Jesus. You had popes, hundreds of years. Yes, you had popes. You don't like it, but you had popes. And yes, the Pope, the Bishop of Rome, decided whenever there was a tie, or ultimately whenever there was a decision to be made that the other bishops didn't agree with, that why he was first among equals, because he would get the tie vote, And it carried on like that for 1,500 years. There was the little hiccup, of the guys in the East betraying the Catholics and then like calling them for help and then still betraying them and so on. And not proselytizing at all, not catechizing the world and so on, which the Catholics did do. But other than that hiccup, and considering all the Gnostic and heresies and the Arian heresy, which like took over 97 to 99% of all bishops were heretics for a time, for quite a long time. But then you've got to realize that the Catholic Church is supernaturally protected. And now we're in a similar place to Arianism, which used to be the Catholic Church. Over 90% of it is completely corrupted by Satanistic Freemasons, which has spent hundreds of years infiltrating the church. I mean, this didn't happen overnight. If you find out what the Illuminati are, and the Illuminati are one of the many branches of the satanic continuous, Gnostic infiltrations that have attacked the church since the beginning. The Illuminati were Freemasons, and the Freemasons were Illuminati, and vice versa. And then they spread into different names, and you have the Illuminatis from Spain, the Illuminatis from Bavaria, and the Freemasons from the East, and the Freemasons from the West, and so on. And Protestantism, there's quite an interesting document by Miles Mathis. I'm not a huge fan of Miles Mathis, but it's quite interesting what he says on concerning Luther, and there are a couple of points in there that I touch on. In brief, what Miles Mathis says is that Luther was a Jew that was helped in his endeavor to destroy the church by the Medici, they were at the time part of the papacy. I don't buy the second bit, and I'm not sure if I buy the first bit, but one thing that is absolutely true and very interesting, and that I'd noticed before, was Luther was condemned to death and was like supposed to be arrested and everything, and he was like right there, and it keeps slipping through people's fingers, and then like a few years later in the same town or whatever, he's not hunted down, and yet he's there. It's like, wait, how does that work? What Miles Mathis does is he shows links through Luther's family that he was a very well-off-to-do guy, as was the ex-nun that he ended up banging and marrying. So it was all, there was definitely powerful families involved here. So it was quite interesting from that perspective, anyways. Let me just quickly, but I mean, the whole five solas are just moronic, and I don't know how else to say it. It's just stupid. You know, you've got one of your base premises is that, well, only scripture is God breathed, like that retard James White goes on about. Only scripture is God breathed. Oh, really? Who put scripture together? Humans. Yeah. Humans that didn't put it together for about 300 years. And well, it took us 1500 years to put together. Oh, really? Because you consider Luther as one of the guys that fixed the Bible, do you? Well, how about if Bruce Jenner comes along and decides to take out a whole bunch of stuff that Paul wrote? That's what Luther did. He took out the whole of James because it says that you're not saved by faith alone. You know, the whole faith alone. That's the other one of the solas of the retarded Protestants. By faith alone. No, you're not saved by faith alone. You have to do works. Yep, works are in there. Now, if you read the Catechism of Trent, it's very clear on this matter. Very clear and very scriptural. But good old Luther didn't like that, so he took James out. You know, just completely rip it. Too far, you're taking out a bit too much shit. You know, you're kind of going to leave it in, just call it apocrypha or something. Just pathetic. Truly pathetic. I mean, you have to be mentally retarded. If you start from scratch and you decide that Protestantism is it, you're mentally retarded. Let me just make that very clear. You're just stupid to a point that there's no need to talk to you at all. But most Protestants, like most Muslims, like most Churchian Novus Orcos, you know, like people that think they're Catholic but they're not because they follow the Novus Orco, you know, thing. You're born into it. It's the caterpillar and the crust of the bread being the best part. That's what it is. So you're just born into it and you just believe it. But it's a lie. Okay, I'm gonna try and kill this.